Hello, BookTube. As you know, if you've watched this channel, I've made quite a few videos about books. Just putting it a little bit mildly. I've made thousands and thousands of videos about books. And this probably explains why the all-knowing, all-seeing YouTube algorithm will often suggest book-related videos to me. I tend to follow up on a lot of them. I watch a lot of YouTube, so I'm perfectly happy for new suggestions. You never know when a new suggestion might not end up being a new favorite channel. But sometimes you have to take the wheat with the chaff, and sometimes I get recommendations that don't make any sense to me, or that once I watch them only infuriate me. And I have to admit, there's a demographic commonality among these things. It's usually 20-something male YouTubers who are tobacco addicts and have 4 pounds of industrial product in their hair. And when such beings talk about books, the YouTube algorithm tends to recommend their book videos to me. And if I have to go through it, so do you. We've done this before. We've done this a few different times. And the victim, I mean the subject for today, is a young finance BroTube guy named Nate O'Brien. I'll leave a link to his video down below. The video was called I read a book a day, and here's what happened. And he has 645,000 subscribers. He is closing in on 1 million subscribers. And at the time that I watched it, this particular video had 45,000 views. Which just serves as a reminder, if you needed one, that the numbers, the sheer scale of YouTube outside of our little corner of BookTube is staggeringly huge. The type of numbers that no BookTuber could dream of. At least not in our little neighborhood where you haven't sold your soul. And I clicked on the video and I looked at Nate O'Brien and thought, okay, all right, fine. So you have ostentatiously plain clothing. It's all dark. You are filming in an ostentatiously minimalist environment, and he has that way of talking. The way that all of these. It's been my experience that if a BookTuber has over 100,000 subscribers, no matter what kind of a channel they have, no matter what their specialty or concentration is, they will all have learned this kind of completely robotic, android, fake way of talking that always ends every sentence with a slow beat for emphasis. And as if they've been talking for 30 minutes leading up to that sentence, only it's every sentence. I don't know where they learned this gimmick, but they all do it, so they have to learn it somewhere. And it is unbelievably off-putting. All it does is suggest that you are a hired hand in a studio who's reading a script for the millionth time. And for all I know, that's what Nate O'Brien could be. There might not be any genuine content in his advice videos for how to be a millionaire by the time you're 23, how to retire by the time you're 24, that sort of thing. You can see, I think, not to get too personal, I don't know Nate O'Brien at all, I never will, but you don't have to watch too many of his videos. Of course, I watched the book-related one, but then I went and watched a couple of others. You don't have to watch many of these videos to sense that this is a hollowed out life. This is someone who I myself believe that it's very difficult to hide deep-seated unhappiness. Even if you're a skilled professional, which by 600,000 subscribers he must certainly be. One way or another, even if he's as happy as a clam, the life that he describes, one that is just monomaniacally obsessed with money and the accoutrements of money, sounds completely joyless. So when I saw that, I was immediately on guard against what someone like this would say about books. I was immediately on guard against what he might say about books, and I was also immediately anticipating some of the things that he might say about books, because a number of these BroTube finance guys do talk about books. Because Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Warren Buffett have made offhand comments about how I try to read a book every month. I don't care if it kills me. And these BroTube guys always think, well, if he reads, then I must read. And they talk about extracting value from books. They use that phrase. It's so horrible, so anathema to any kind of genuine reading. But they use it all the time. And Nate O'Brien does too. He's not 2 seconds into this video before he's talking about how he reads books in order to, quote, increase my human capital. I have no idea what that means. For Xerxes, the Lord and God Emperor of all of the Persian Empire, who had millions and millions of slaves, I could understand if he made a reference to human capital. I have no idea what Nate O'Brien is talking about. Maybe we should check his basement. I don't know what human capital is. I have no idea. And books don't increase your capital. at all. They aren't supposed to, and if you're using them for that way, you're using them wrong. You are a ghoul haunting a tomb. but anyway, I was curious to see what he would say about books. And he talks about once you get over that diction thing that all these guys do, that now we're gonna talk about books, with the pauses between the words lengthening and then the big stress on the final word. They all do it, whether they're talking about finance or transporting cars or how to learn charisma or anything like that. They all talk the same way. It's like some sort of bargain basement styrofoam cutout of Tony Robbins, and it doesn't suit them at all. And I just shudder to think that maybe some of these guys talk this way in real life too, that it's just taken over their life, and maybe their friends don't notice or don't tell them about it, because I'm pretty sure that all their friends take financial handouts from them. One way or another, the fact that Warren Buffett reads a book a month doesn't mean you should read a book a month. You should only read if you want to read. It's not a pathway to retiring at 25. But anyway, he uses books and talks about them as a path to financial success. But there's a chance that some of the things that he says, he gives us 6 points about how to prioritize reading, and I have to assume that these points are going out to an audience that's massively composed of other finance dude bros, the ones with the hugely ostentatious 4-pound analog watches that are designed to not to tell them time, but to demonstrate to other people that they have $2,000 to drop on a watch, because their phone tells them their time, and they never stop looking at their phone. Never. Not during any action that you might think would be an action during which they would not check their phone. They check their phone during those actions. They never stop checking their phone, which, as you're going to see, is going to undercut some of these points. But we'll get to that. I have to assume that this video is going to reach a large audience like that. So there's hope in my heart that if he accidentally makes good points about prioritizing reading, maybe it will work. Maybe it will have a beneficial effect. So let's go through those points. I've got the rad pad here, and see what we can extract from them. We'll see what kind of value we can extract from Nate O'Brien's points about reading a book a day and what happened. Point number one is to limit distractions. Concentrate exclusively on reading. He makes a point later in the video of saying 30 minutes a day is a sort of minimum benchmark for him. I know that for a lot of you, a lot of those of us on BookTube, I'm sure that Nate O'Brien does not know that anything like BookTube exists. I'm sure that he doesn't know any actual readers. Nevertheless, for us, 30 minutes a day for reading, for most of us, is going to seem a little bit on the thin side. But nevertheless, I think we can all agree, it's a great benchmark, 30 minutes a day. And the advice itself, this first piece of advice, is absolutely true. It's absolutely correct. You have to prioritize reading if you're going to make reading a priority. That is actually true no matter what the noun is that you substitute for reading. As everybody knows when they talk about their priorities, everybody already knows this, that if you want to get really good at skateboarding, whether you're going to be out there practicing for 5 hours a day, or at least an hour or two a day, as much time as you can spare for it, you're going to be out there doing that. If you want to get really good at dancing, ballroom dancing, you're going to have to take a class, and by take class you mean you're going to have to concentrate time and effort on it. I don't know why people don't think this applies to reading, but it certainly does. If you don't give time over for reading, then you will have no time for reading. Reading will not get done. So this first point is absolutely true. You can't think when you're in your mid-20s, this kid's 22, I think, you can't think. Once you leave school, you can't just think, well, reading is such a fundamental part of life that it will make its own time. No. You have to make time yourself. Our little corner of BookTube is full of very busy people who are the opposite of yours truly. I don't do anything. I don't have any kind of representative human hygiene. I don't have a job. I'm not even wearing pants. But a lot of our people, a lot of our peeps on BookTube very much do. And they still make the time, because if you don't, it won't happen. So this is a very good first point. We're off to a fine start. Nate O'Brien's collateral is really high. So let's go on to number two, because if we don't go right on to number two, I might be tempted to make some sort of joke about the words Nate O'Brien and really high in the same sentence. So let's go straight on to number two. Point number two is to establish small consequences. By this he means punishments, but he's using business speak. Small consequences if the reading isn't done. So he mentions when he's talking about this point that the consequences can be positive or negative. You can either reward yourself or punish yourself, but he only talks about punishing himself, and I think that's probably the first thing that will come to the minds of most people who watch him. And it's kind of a good point that you might want to set up a system of consequences if you don't do reading in a certain day, especially if the time that would otherwise have gone to reading went to nothing at all. If you really want to read more, and you say this to people, and you make the huge mistake of saying it to me, and yet you are wasting a huge block of time every day on Animal Crossing or Words with Friends or whatever it is, then maybe you should establish a certain kind of punishment. This little tiny thing that I do that I enjoy in the day, if I don't do an hour of reading in the day, then I'm not going to give it to myself. It's not a bad idea in theory. The only problem with it is that a person who lacks the self-discipline to read for a certain amount of time every day is certainly going to lack the self-discipline to punish themselves for not reading. So maybe we should just move straight on. The third point that he makes is to dump bad books that aren't working for you, which is certainly going to have Sean the Book Maniac, our very own Empress of Bailings, nodding eagerly. Sean is the foremost champion of this as a way of reading, and I have expressed my reservations about it in the past. I worship the ground that Sean walks on, of course, as does everyone who watches his channel. But I have expressed my worry that sometimes the act of bailing on a book, which is what we call it in our little corner of BookTube. Nate O'Brien doesn't know that term, but I have expressed my worry that the act of bailing on a book can become its own dopamine reward, and that encourages you to bail on a book instead of giving it a little of your time and attention. Authors aren't writing fortune cookies, after all. A book deserves a small amount of time and attention. In his own defense, I should point out that Sean often gives books just that. He doesn't bail willy-nilly. I just worry that in less responsible hands, the bailing might become its own reward. But nevertheless, as a piece of advice, this is really good, which is why I don't categorically disagree with Sean, because you should bail on a book if it's just not working for you at all. If you're dragging yourself through it, then either the book is doing something wrong or it's not the right time for you to read the book. And there are billions of other books out there just waiting for you. There is no wrong way to do this. So some of you can't stand it. I know some of you find bailing just totally anathema. You just can't do it. But I would suggest that's more a cultural thing than it is a literary thing. You probably don't quit on anything when you start it. But when it comes to books, if a book is wasting your time is precious and very limited. So you shouldn't let it continue to waste your time. Nate O'Brien also mentions here, in a rather charming aside, he mentions that this is also true if the book is above your head. If you're reading and just realizing, okay, well, I've accidentally stepped into the deep end of the pool here and I'm not getting anything out of this because I'm not ready yet, have the self-awareness to quit then too, rather than plow on just so you can say that you read something that was maybe ostentatiously difficult. So that's not a bad piece of advice. It's a piece of advice that Sean has been making for years now. If a book doesn't do it for you, well, dump it. Maybe you'll come back to it, maybe you won't, but don't grind away. Then the next point that Nate O'Brien makes is to involve yourself with your book, to increase your appreciation, your extraction of value by noting, highlighting, annotating, anything that you need to do to really make the book's contents your own. Now, you have to keep in mind the kind of book he's talking about is the type of business/self-help book that often has bulleted points. It often has inset boxes with little meditations in them or whatnot. I review one of those books every single day for Kirkus Reviews, so I know their modus operandi backwards and forwards, and it's a modus operandi that lends itself to highlighting and extracting and annotating and whatnot. But I would say that all books do, and this is another piece of advice that I strongly agree with. You should interact with your book. Definitely interact with it. If you're using an ebook, for instance, it's especially easy because you're not damaging anything. It takes no work. You don't need to find a pen or anything like that. Hold the book open, make your mark or whatever. But one way or another, even long before there were ebooks, I was doing this. Annotate your books. Put in your comments. that sort of thing. Keep a commonplace book where you extract bits and put them with the date, the time, and what it made you think. Those are all ways to make the reading experience much more integral to yourself, much more personal to you. I've had complaints over the decades from some people that slows the process down, but you know, I know I'm the worst person in the world to say this, but reading a lot of books is not the be-all and end-all of reading. So this is actually a point that I agree with. So we're doing fine. Nate O'Brien and I are doing fine so far. Then the next one, his next point, is something where he's going to find himself in disagreement with the last 40 pounds of product boy that we talked about, who the algorithm suggested to me. In that case, it was Alex O'Connor from Cosmic Skeptic, who did a video on reading. And one of his most emphatic points was to do what Nate O'Brien is here telling you not to do, which is skip. Don't skip, don't skim. Nate O'Brien says that he's watched many YouTube videos from people extolling the virtues of reading. I shudder to think what some of those videos are. Probably the algorithm will suggest them to me now that I've watched his video. If the algorithm does that, I'm taking you with me. but he says that he's watched a lot of those videos, and a lot of times the person will say you should do this: skim, pick out things, skip chapters, maximize your reading experience. And that's what no less an authority than Alex J. O'Connor said about reading was do the same thing. Extract bits and pieces. And Nate O'Brien comes down firmly against this, says don't do that. No matter how many financial gurus, no matter how many house-flipping geniuses he has watched who tell him to do this, he's striking a path of his own, and he's saying you shouldn't do that. It'll take a little longer, but you should read the whole book. And of course I agree with that. Of course I do. If you're reading a book and you get the impression that this just isn't working at all, and I'm wondering if there's something I can extract that's of value down the line, then that you want to revert to another one of Nate O'Brien's pieces of advice and simply drop the book. Rather than make a Frankenstein's monster out of it, just drop the book. It's not right for you. But anyway, I'll move on to the last point here that he makes, which is also very interesting, which is to get an accountability partner to help you hit your reading goals, whether it's a book club or a reading buddy. In his case, he says it's his brother. That I think is probably one of the many reasons for the exploding popularity that book clubs had before the pandemic, was that it does add an element of accountability. I'm sure that buddy reads do the same thing here on BookTube. That you've got that person, you're going to be talking to them in a day on Voxer, you probably should get your chapter read. It's actually not a bad piece of advice. I worry about it, of course, because it puts responsibility for something that you claim to want on someone else's shoulders. I don't agree with that any more in principle here than I do with people who need a certain kind of food or music in order to be inspired to write. All of this stuff should come from inside you. You shouldn't be placing the weight of any of it on someone else. But in a friendly kind of setting, an accountability partner is probably a good idea. So those are 6 pieces of advice, and they are all fairly good. They're all fairly good pieces of advice on how to read more, if that's what you want to do. Now, I think that's probably preaching to the choir here on BookTube, but you have to keep in mind, this kid's audience is probably largely composed of people who don't read. So the fact that he hit 6 good pieces of advice all in one video, it's certainly kudos to him. It's certainly that part of the algorithm suggesting his video to me made me smile. There were things that did not make me smile, of course. He goes on to say that the quote is, I don't actually read a book a week. He goes on to admit that 40%, he says, of the reading that he does is audiobooks that are done while he's in line or while he doesn't mention vaping or smoking or out on the porch or anything like that. He mentions other things, but one way or another, he mentions that 40% of the reading that he does in a week is audiobooks. And a lot of you are going to frown on that. I know a lot of you are going to say, well, then that doesn't really count. And it certainly goes against the advice about limiting distractions, because audiobooks exist so that you can quote unquote read, so that you can experience at least part of a book while doing something else. Audiobooks exist for distracted reading. I guarantee you that when Nate O'Brien listens to his 40% of audiobooks, he's not just sitting there with a blank look on his face. Although he does seem to excel at blank looks on the face. I guarantee you he doesn't sit there doing nothing else. He does a lot else. It says it himself, that he does this while he's doing other things. Okay, fine. Then that might get you a little more in the way of value extraction, but that flies in the face of concentrating on reading. And it is that comment, what was the quote? I don't actually read a book a week, is a symptom of the larger thing that is wrong with this video, and that tends to be wrong with BroTube videos like this when the algorithm suggests it to me. And that can be summed up by saying that every single sentence in this video is a lie. Every single claim that Nate O'Brien makes is a lie. The advice that he gives is not. The advice that he gives, as we've seen, is basic stuff and really good. There are some of the reminders in here that even diehard readers would do well to remember. But I wonder at the effectiveness of it if it is marmaladed all over in every single direction by intentional lies. I wonder how effective such language can be. Nate O'Brien does not read for 30 minutes a day. And the claim that 40% of the stuff that he reads, when he reads, is audiobooks is also a lie. He doesn't read at all. He mentions at one point in his video that most of his peer group don't read because either they're too busy or they're too distracted by other things. And as an example of distraction, he mentions that, and then he has the clean, beautifully filmed visuals. If you're going to reach for a book or for your phone. I don't know Nate O'Brien. I've never spent any time around him. I guarantee you that he reaches for his phone. This is not someone who reads at all. In fact, that was so obvious by halfway through this video that I was honestly thinking that this video's title had set me up for another Blinkist commercial where he's going to reveal at the end that not only is 40% of what he reads audiobooks, but that he doesn't even read those. That he just reads the 15-minute summaries on Blinkist. But I'm amazed to find that it is not. He has either been approached by Blinkist and turned them down, which doesn't seem like quite the thing for someone wearing a 5-pound watch to do, or he hasn't been approached. They haven't found him yet. I don't know how that would be. They found a lot smaller fry than him. One way or another, though, the fake sincerity, the fake pomposity of the language. Now we're going to take the next point. I'm not sure that, plus all of the bald-faced lying. This is not a reader. This is not someone who reads. Just makes me wonder if somebody who's not in our little corner of BookTube were to stumble across this thing via the same algorithm, would they just be put off and not pay attention to the advice? And I would worry. It'd be a shame if that was true, because the advice, for some reason or other, is very good. Maybe it's his. Maybe from a previous time, he gets very misty-eyed, as so many of these 20-something finance bros do, about, like I mentioned, a previous period in his life that ended about 5 minutes ago. He gets all misty-eyed about following all the Harry Potter books and reading avidly before he became monomaniacally, soullessly obsessed with money. Well, that's not the book's fault, right? That's not reading's fault. Nothing changed, except you. And I worry that somebody would watch this video and just be so put off by that they don't pay attention to the advice. So I thought I would stress the advice over the delivery method here, since the algorithm didn't care and presented it to me. I'm sure because book was in the title of his video. Although, I should point out, even the title of his video is a lie. It's just kind of amazing for someone who's 22. Who knows what he'll be able to do when he retires at 24 and can lie full time. But the title of the video is, I read a book a day, and then in parentheses, and here's what happened. The video doesn't tell what happened. He's like, he either forgot that part or just thought a tease video, a tease parenthetical insertion like that in a title will get you more clicks. And it worked. It absolutely worked. His videos had more views than all of mine put together. His traffic is higher in a day than mine is in a year, or yours is in a year. So it worked. But I can't help but think, I won't beat a dead horse here, but I can't help but think that the veneration that a lot of these finance and woodworking and boat shop and motor car dude bros do place on reading in their videos, every once in a while they can be relied upon to do a video about how books changed their life. It's always a lie, but they can be relied upon to do it. And I can't help but think that reverence is good, is good news. Is that the bean? It is. I guess I shouldn't worry. There are no other dogs in this room. Yes, that is the bean. She was wandering around just amusing herself. Anyway, I have to think that reverence is probably a good thing. Maybe we're rubbing off on the rest of the world. At least it's a dream. We can hope so. So I'm going to wrap this up for now. I will leave a link to Nate O'Brien's video. It doesn't need any more viewers. He has plenty of viewers. But you might be able to extract some value from it. and one way or another, I had to share the misery with you because the algorithm shared it with me, and that's what you're here for. So if this happens again, we will reconvene. Who knows who will slap around then. But I wasn't a complete evisceration. The advice that he gives is good. Always worth doing. I could make a video on my own simply repeating those pieces of advice, especially the first one. Make time for reading. You'll be glad you did. I guarantee you, if you follow Nate O'Brien's advice and set aside 30 minutes for reading every day, I guarantee you that after a month of doing that, you will move that up to an hour a day. And you won't find it all that hard. You'll find the time. Maybe someday Nate O'Brien will find the time as well. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.